Let us continue with the mouse and his child. Chapter 9. The interrupted task of moving the dollhouse back to the platform was completed. The father's wartime donkey-leg arms were laid aside and his regular ones put on, and he and the elephant were married by the frog on the front porch that afternoon. The wind sighed in the oak and the hickory leaves, the tall weeds rustled in the yard of the abandoned cottage by the railroad. A train went clattering past and hooted once. In the distance the dump glittered with smoke and waning golden sunlight, as the ex-foragers sang, "Oh, promise me." The child stood up beside his father as the best man, the seal was a bridesmaid, the kingfisher and the bittern gave the elephant away, as she and the mouse father swore that they would take each other to have and to hold. Winding and unwinding, intoned the frog. Whole or broken, bright or rusty until the end of your tin. I now pronounce you mouse and wife. Late sports final, yelled the blue jay on his last trip for the day. Dung beetles clinch series, roaches sign new coach. Wind-ups wed. The father laughed with happiness as he looked out at the sun, low in the west over the dump. This time yesterday we had nothing, he said, and today the world is ours. Now for self-winding, said the child. Blue, said the elephant, a very pale faded seashore kind of blue outside, I think. Ivory trim. And inside ivory with blue trim. Perhaps not ivory exactly, but something more off-white. I think I missed a page. Nope. Cream, maybe, said the seal, almost a buff, lighter. What are you talking about, my dear, said the father. The house, said his bride. Of course, that dreadful black paint has got to come off first. And even before we get to that, we'll have to give the place a good scrubbing and air it out, said the seal. Quite right, agreed the elephant, but I can see that you are going to get along very well. Between us, I have no doubt that we shall soon have everything well organized. Then, if the men will simply work out the means of doing what needs to be done, we can quickly put our house in good order. What about self-winding, said the child. Later, said his father, first things first. The autumn nights were colder now, the crickets chirped more slowly, other insect songs fell silent. Through the days the air quickened, leaves changed, and wind from the fields and meadows beyond the dump was sharp in wood smoke, and there was constant activity in the dollhouse atop the pole. Every day, two of the uncles combed the dump for supplies, while the third stood guard at the house. Either the bittern and the frog or the kingfisher and the frog were regularly to be seen returning home with salvage hoisted up to the platform by seal or crane. I have to stop eating cucumber. Steel wool and strong soap had been requisitioned by the elephant, sandpaper and turpentine, paint and paintbrushes. Furnishings were spoken of, and glass for the windows, drapery, fabrics were discussed at length. The resources of the dump were strained to the utmost limit, and none of the males in the family knew where it would end. All thoughts of self-winding were put aside, and the spare parts can was in steady demand as one set of activities works was exchanged for another, depending on the daily activities. It was found that string-climbing clockwork produced a motion ideally suited to sandpapering paint off houses. Fiddle-playing arms and motors were good for scraping, bicycle-riding mechanisms lent themselves to stirring of color mixtures, and all were used accordingly by the mouse and his child. The elephant, with a little broom attached to her swinging trunk, swept out all the rooms. Behind her hopped the frog, wetting down the floors with water pistol, followed by the bittern, who held the mouse father's feet, while the father administered a vigorous scrubbing with a brown soap. Then the frog retracted his steps for the rinsing, and the forage squad, shuffling after him, with rags and fragments of sponge tied to their feet, finished the job. The house, as it happened, was not painted completely blue, that color being in short supply at the dump. There was only enough blue for the porch and one dormer. From the bottoms of the available paint can, however, came other colors, all in other possible combinations. Crimsons, scarlets, pinks, yellows, ochres, and oranges, and several shades of green. Each color was made to go as far as it could, but no two dormers were painted the same, and every surface of the siding and all the angles of the roof were different. Day after day the work continued, and night after night, by waving light of candle stubs, the tireless wind-up swung from strings hauled up, lowered by birds, while frog hung giddily in a variety of slings and bosun's chairs, putting in the finer touches. The house was firmly nailed to the platform, the bittern saw to that, and went on strengthening old repairs to make new ones, until Ung Wang Chong of his hammering became a familiar throughout the dump as the carousel's cracked waltz. For some time, glassless windows were as a thorn in the elephant's side, and her immediate family and all the uncles spent sleepless nights over the problem, till one day the frog, having seen a light bulb melting in trash fires, conceived a method of glass cutting by means of red-hot wire. Flat glass was scarce in the dump, but there was an unlimited supply of bottles, Owing to variations in size, shape, and curvature, some of the resulting windows were bowed and some were not, but the amber, blue, and green panels glowed like jewels when set into their frames. Sounds a lot like stucco, doesn't it? With cracked glass. Beautiful and shining in the light. Drapes and carpets were equally varied, as was the improvised furniture, but the place began to be homelike. With each dawn, the Dog Star, progressively high over the horizon as winter approached, looked down on the improvements until, at the last hammering stopped, the platform was cleared of paint cans, brushes, and nails, scraps of wood, and the Elephant pronounced the dollhouse fit for occupancy. The house's character had changed much with the fire that had erected, and several stages of reconstruction that had renewed it. Phoenix-like, the place seemed to be born of itself. Odd bits of graceful ornament and carving still clung here and there throughout the new repairs. The crooked porch faced the weather in an easy poise. The watch tower, smartened with orange and yellow paint and finished off with a railing and flagpole, lost its grimness. The mansard roof, however much off-true it might be, was solid as a rock, and all the wonky chimneys and dormers stood defiantly askew and felt themselves to be atop a going concern once more. The dollhouse would never again be what it had once been. Its stateliness and beauty were long gone, but some of the new and different things emerged from the concerted efforts of the little family. And the last touches of the trim had been applied, and the vari-coloured curtains hung in the bottle-glass windows, and the house assumed a look of wild confidence and reckless vibrato. Indeed, bravado. And teetered swaggered on its perch as if it dared the world to show it and its occupants a single peril it had not seen and laughed at. One last touch was lacking, and the spare parts can supplied it. From the Bonzo label, a paper flag was made and ran up the flagpole early one morning. The mouse child kept a steady drum roll as the banner rose to the top of the staff and fluttered in the dawn breeze. The little dog on the flag smiled up at the great one fading in the sky, while the edge of the dump, brought there by mouse child's drum, a pathetic figure, shabby and torn in draggled dressing gown, stood watching. Manny Rat felt the sharpness of the coming winter in the morning air, and he shivered, mumbling his toothless gums forlornly as he looked at the heights, so lightly held, so briefly his, so irretrievably lost. He fingered the good luck coin that now hung around his neck, and touching with his paw the words, "You will succeed," he crept back slowly to his failure and his shame. Hold on, now I'm all concerned something's going to happen. During the evening that followed the morning of the flag rising, the Elephant observed to be deep in thought as she stood on the platform looking into the parlour, where the fluttering light of one dim candle alternately gained and lost little territory in the shadows. "Is anything troubling you, my dear?" the father asked. "Not exactly troubling me," said his wife, "but the house seems to want something more, and I cannot for the life of me think what it is." "Another flagpole, Mamma?" suggested the child. "No," said the Elephant. "Carpeting on the stairs?" said the Seal. "No," said the Elephant. "Lights," offered a quiet voice from the weeds below. "Of course," exclaimed the Elephant, "that's what it is. It's been so long since I lived indoors that I'd forgotten. This house used to have real lights, not just a few candle stubs." She paused. "Who said that?" she asked. Frog went to the edge of the platform and looked down. "Manny Rat," he said. "Ah," said the Elephant, "I thought we'd seen the last of that loathsome creature. Send him away." The bittern launched himself on the platform, and the sometime boss of the dump cowered abjectly in the twilight among the weeds. "Oh, please," he cried, "do not send me away. I am nothing now, and nobody. I can do no harm. Everybody laughs at Manny Rat now, and only yesterday the sexton beetle tried to bury me while I was napping. Have pity." "It really seems quite harmless now," said the father. "I can find some lights and put 'em in for you," said Manny Rat. "I can figure out all kind of things. I am handy and a willing worker." "You used to like the dark," said the mouse child. "No more," said Manny Rat. "Oh, a lonely thing is darkness, a fearful thing, full of hatred, laughs, and whispers. No good ever came of darkness. Take me in and let me work for you. How beautiful your house could be with lights." "Poor wretch," the father said. "It's difficult not to pity him." "Mercy," pleaded Manny Rat. "Think of it. Think how I've helped you. Where would you be now if you had not had to fight against me? Could you have won at Rat victory if there had been no Manny Rat to be defeated?" "There's something in what he says," agreed the Frog. "I won't have him in my house," said the Elephant. "Really, my dear," said the husband, "I think that we no longer have any fear of Manny Rat. He seems to have learned his lesson." "And if he hasn't," said the bittern, "I shall be very happy to hammer it into him." "Aside from the fact that he's a black-hearted villain and not for a moment to be trusted," said the Elephant, "I find him personally offensive." "I will take a bath," promised Manny Rat. "I will get a new dressing gown and be clean and neat." The Elephant sighed. "Oh, God! Whew! I was half a second away. Half a second from that alarm going off. The elephant sighed. It would be nice to have a real electric lights. So the ladder was let down for him, and Manny Rat climbed upward once again. And we'll continue reading this tomorrow. Oh, will we? No, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. I'd like to see how this plays out. The fallen master of the dump made good on his pledge to bathe, and with the dirt he seemed to shed the last bits of pretensions. Chastened, subdued, and looking very much the humble penitent in his new dressing gown, a clean but coarse scrap of sacking, he dedicated himself to the task of bringing light to the house where he had revelled in darkness. Having explained that results were not to be hoped for overnight, Randy Rat began his researches at once, and applied himself to close examination of the traces of old wine and store made in the dollhouse. So it was that, looking at the house from that point of view, of a diligent workman rather than that of a careless master, he found many other things that wanted doing. No job was too heavy for him, none too menial. He swept and dusted and washed the windows. He hewed and carried and made repairs and improvements far beyond the modest abilities of little wind-up family and the three uncles. His eye was mild, and the old demonic fire that gleamed there once was no more. So meek was he, so touchingly grateful to his least kind word, that his transformation would have melted the heart of stone. The elephant, however, as impervious to his present humility as she had ever been to his past arrogance, made sure that he was kept under surveillance both strict and constant. The family being comfortably settled in the dollhouse, the mouse child now found leisure time in which the problem of self-winding at last might be attempted. Therefore, after taking stock of the spare parts inventory, they began to consider how it might be done. Not only is the solution of such a problem far beyond my ability, said Frog, but when you stop to think about it, it scarcely seems necessary. You have good friends to wind you and all the clockwork anyone could ever want. An almost unlimited variety of activities is open to you at your convenience. Why would you want anything so tiring as constant motion? You don't know what it's like to go through life the way we used to, never knowing whether our next winding might be coming from, said the child. It's a principle of the thing, said the father. Most wants independence. Having fought for and won our territory, are we now to be helpless to patrol its boundaries unassisted? The rest of the family withdrew so that the mouse and his child might confront their problem undistracted. As father and son stood alone on the platform and looked out across the dumps, the blue haze of autumn hung in the air, and the leaves rattled their flaming colours in the wind. The gleaming railroad tracks converged in silence on the far horizon. The marsh hawks had brought them to their victory, and their house still skimmed above the swamp. The same black crows that cawed over the snowy junkyard almost a year ago now cawed on this day too. The sound of another winter's coming was in their voices. Key times winding equals go, said the child. Go divided by winding equals key, said the father. This isn't getting us anywhere, said the child. Let's start again. The father stood motionless, his empty arms out before him. The child's hands were poised above the nut-shell drum that echoed to his voice. Their old rusty motor lay on the platform before them. As step by step, wheel by wheel, cog by cog, they reasoned their way through clockwork that had driven them on their journey out of the world. The sunlight faded into dusk. Then darkness rose up with its myriad voice below the red glow of the sky. Night passed into silent morning and the dawn. The dog star flashed and glimmered. The mouse and his child, beaded with dew, watched the sun come up and wondered when they should achieve the daring leap of discovery in the X of self-winding. Another day passed, another night without success, and the following morning they were no nearer to the solution they had been when they started. Manny Rat, returning home across the silent dump with a coil of electrical wire, found them baffled and irritated, while a yawning bittern stood guard and shook his head. Springtime's cog, said the child. Time's cog, time's wheel, said the father, and still no X. Excuse me for saying so, but said Manny Rat, but there are things that simply cannot be figured out. We figured out how to get out of the pond, said the child, and we figured out how to take the dollhouse away from you. Oh, yes, I know, said Manny. No one wants to listen to a loser. Something of his old self flashed out from his glance. Reasonings won't do it all, he said. You have to have feeling for things. He put down his wire, picked up the two motors from the spare parts cam, and hummed abstractedly to himself. Interesting. As he inspected them. Going and ungoing, he remembered, and followed the coils of steel springs carelessly with his paw. Caressingly with his paw. Then he sat down with the motor in his lap, and still humming, retracted the sequence of the gear trains. Thus peacefully occupied, Manny Rat seemed completely different from his old satanic self, seemed almost another kindly uncle. Watching him, the mouse child found it difficult to believe that this was once a cold-blooded murderer of wind-ups whose fond hope only lately had been to smash him and his father. And Manny Rat, humorously humming placidly, as if he were indeed an uncle repairing a favourite nephew's plaything, had the same surprising thought. He stole a sideways glance at the father and son. They were not unlike him, he realized for the first time. Almost they were tin caricatures of himself. In their long exposure to the weather, moss had rooted in the crevices of their tin, and now it covered them like soft green fur. Manny Rat laughed inwardly. Perhaps they were becoming animals, as he was once powerful animal dump, would turn into a toy. After all, why not? Had their roles not been totally reversed? Had not the hunted become the hunters, the losers the winners? Had not they risen to a high place, as he fell from it? Just such a spring as these had they flung the coin that knocked out all his teeth. His nose quivered as he looked down at the worn brass disc that was cool against his chest, and he opened and closed his jaws as if he could still bite. Out of the corner of his eye he noted that the bittern, however sleepy, was alert and watchful. "I'm going and back again," muttered Manny Rat, and he tried to sense how energy released by one spring could be made to wind another spring. The hours passed unheeded. Twilight came again, and evening, the guardian uncles, relieving one another in regular shifts, had rotated 5 times to their roster. Inside the dollhouse, Frog, coming off duty, lit the candles, and the blue and green and amber windows cast coloured lights and shadows on the platform, and the figures grouped upon it. "Ooh, Christy Moses online." "And Visco's here," said Manny Rat. "And now we watch Vis." Almost against his will, he saw his own paws find the answer that would make the triumph of his enemies complete. He had a sudden craving for treacle brittle, and sadly shook his head. He reached for the pliers and made connecting rods from wires so that he could rearrange gear trains. Then he saw his paws couple 2 of the motors together and wind one up. As the first buzzing spring uncalled, it clickingly wound up the second one, which, running down, rewound the first. Manny Rat put down the motors, stood up, and watched them wind and unwind reciprocally for several minutes. With an odd little questioning smile, he picked up with a screwdriver and touched the father's chin with it. "Go ahead," said the father, and felt his senses leave him as he and his child were taken apart. They returned to consciousness to find themselves walking, the springs beside them buzzing and clicking as they alternately expanded and contracted their coils. Manny Rat turned away without a word, dragging with him the wire he had brought from the dump. The soft light from the windows streamed over him, and his departing shadow looked across at father and son. "Look, Papa," said the child, "we did it. We're self-winding. Oh, thank you, Manny Rat." "No, he didn't say that. He said, 'Look, Papa,' said the child, 'he did it. We're self-winding. Oh, thank you, Uncle Manny.'" Manny Rat dropped the wire and rolled around. "What's that?" he whispered. "I didn't mean," the child stammered. He meant to thank you, that was all," the father said. Manny Rat turned his back on them and went into the house. So it was that the mouse and his child became self-winding, that they might, unassisted, walk the boundaries of the territory they had won from Manny Rat. Chapter 10. And I think I'm going to finish the book tonight. Okay. After his remarkable success with the problem, I'm drinking a glass of water. Getting thirsty. After his remarkable success with the problem of self-winding, Manny Rat sharply accelerated his preparations for the illumination of the dollhouse. He had worked hard before, but now he seemed a driven rat. He was gone for days at a time on research expeditions in the walls of the houses in the town. He found and stole miles of wire and masses of old and new equipment, miniature sockets and switches, transformers, fuses, and circuit breakers in quantities sufficient for the electrification of a dozen full-size houses. His manner changed perceptibly. The meekness that had marked his fresh start came and went in flashes now. What was past, and his attitude implied, and he was looking to the future. He came and went with more assurance and brisker step, was impatient of questions and short in answers as his preliminary work approached completion and the business of the final wiring drew near. At last all was ready. Wires had been stapled onto walls and ceilings all over the house. Sockets had been screwed in place, the switches affixed, brand new miniature light bulbs made their gleaming appearance. A model railroad transformer stood, black and mysterious, in the parlor, which was quickly covered with a fringed cloth at the elephant's command. "Tonight's the night," said Manny Rat, and rubbed his paws together, chuckling. "I can hardly wait for nightfall," said the seal. "How pretty the house will look all lit up." "Yes, indeed," said Manny Rat. "It'll be seen for miles, I promise you." "And yet I shouldn't like it to be too bright and glaring," said the elephant. "I like the effect to be warm and cozy, you know." "Oh yes," said Manny Rat, assuring her with her toothless grin. "It'll be warm." And he busied himself with the materials necessary for connecting the wires from the house to those strung from pole to pole along the railroad tracks. Towards dusk, his preparations nearly finished, the ardent electrician called up the wire he would need and placed it on the platform. There he stopped for a lingering look at the mouseless child, self-windingly and indeterminately walking their boundaries single file, prevented him from going over the edge by a little guardrail he had built. The child wore his little drum as if in constant readiness to sound a call of alarm. The father paced the platform in the air of a newly prosperous landowner surveying his broad acres. Behind him, wound by Frog, strolled the elephant and the seal. The elephant, now that she was Mrs. Mouse, had begun to take some little pains with her appearance. Wearing a black eye patch over the missing eye and a bright kerchief knotted over the missing ear, she looked both charmingly rakish and surprisingly chic. The seal spun a gay parasol on the rod that projected upward from her nose, and the whole little party, in their manifest contentment, mutual esteem, and pride of place, burned their images unforgettably upon the brain of Manny Rat. Going back into the house, he went to the parlour and took from the cupboard 2 large red brass-tipped cardboard cylinders. With his beer can opener, he tore open both of them, and removed a quantity of lead pellets, which he threw out the window in the weeds below. Next he made a careful circuit of the parlour, scattering from the cardboard cylinders a train of black powder all around the room. After that was done, the empty cylinders followed the pellets out the window. That's gunpowder. The bittern, who had been watching him unwinking, yellow-spectacled eyed stare, pointed one large foot at the powder train. "What's that you spilled on the floor?" he asked. "Electrical powder," snapped Manny Rat authoritatively. "You can't very well have electrical light without electrical powder." The bittern, born and bred in the marshes, had no acquaintance whatever with electricity, nor did he recognize shotgun shells and gunpowder when he saw them. So he nodded wisely, pointed his beak straight up to show that he understood, and held his peace. "Now then," said Manny Rat, "it's time to make connections." He unwound some of the coils on the platform and led 2 wires into the window, but did not connect them to the transformer as he should have. Instead, he placed the wires on the floor about an inch apart, fastened them with insulating tape, and laid the brass good luck coin across the 2 bare ends. The words "Your lucky day" was facing up. Manny Rat heaped gunpowder over the coin and the wires and left the parlour winking at the bittern as he went. What? Oh no. The ex-boss of the dump conversion to goodness, auspiciously as it had begun, had suffered a jolting setback with his gift of self-winding to the mouse and his child. He had crowned the victory of those who had ruined him, and the strain upon his moral fibre was too great. However black his sins had been, such high atonement was a heavy burden on him, and his mind almost gave way beneath it. Manny Rat clutched desperately at sanity, and with a sigh he gave himself again to evil. Oh! Damn it! It was in that frame of mind that he had resolved to illuminate the dollhouse in a manner very different from his original intention. He decided to burn it down. Well, we're finished. We're seeing how this goes. He had avoided anything so obvious as matches, and he thoroughly enjoyed the artfulness of his deception. All he needed to do now was to connect the other ends of the wires to the power lines along the railroad tracks. As soon as that was done, a spark would leap in the parlour, and the coin lay on the wires, and the flash would ignite the gunpowder, and the dollhouse would be submitted once again to fire, this time to burn like a torch until there would be nothing left. Manny Rat giggled as he imagined the mouse and his child charged spectres treading endlessly in the ashes of their territory. Then, slinging the loops of wire over his shoulder, he descended the string ladder, unreeling wire as he went. It was at this point the elephant, returning from the family promenade, came into the parlour. "Good heavens," she said, "what's all this?" "Electrical powder," said the bittern acknowledgedly. "You can't very well have lights without it." "Nonsense," said the elephant. "Power is what you mean to say, not powder. I've seen electrical lights before, and there was never any mess like this. Men simply won't clean up after themselves, that's what it amounts to. Wind me up, please, and attach my broom. The rat seems to think that just because he's got no teeth he can be treated much as he likes," she said grimly. "But if he thinks he can turn my house into a dump, he's very much mistaken." She began to sweep up the gunpowder briskly, sending the bittern toward Doll's dustpan, with to pick it up. "What's this?" she said as she uncovered the good luck coin on the wire ends. "That rat's an idiot," she said, and called the frog. Ooh, I'm just going to check to make sure this is still recording. It's been quite some time. Ooh, good, it's still going. "That rat's an idiot," she said, and called the frog. "What's the matter?" he asked. "I don't believe that Manny Rat knows any more about electricity than I do," said the elephant, "and very likely less. Anybody knows that wires have to lead to something. Look, there are 2 nice little ends sticking out of the black box. Now, if they just tie those to these, the whole thing can go on neater, and the lights may possibly go on. That's the way they think they did in the store, I think." "In any case, it can do no harm to try," said Frog. He hung the good luck coin around his neck once more, and spliced the wires. As Manny Rat climbed the pole to the power lines beside the tracks, he was happier rat than he had been for a long time. Dusk had become night, and darkness caressed him lovingly, and he wished he could prolong the moment of delicious anticipation. But he dared not risk failure if he was to know peace of mind again. When he reached the top of the pole, he stood among the glass insulators and felt among the wires there, instinctively to avoid those great humming thick ones that seemed too threatening. He had gleaned useful knowledge from the local rats and his researches in the town, and with that information, and his own sharp intuitions, he felt reasonably safe in what he was doing. The line that he selected was a relatively low-powered one that ran to the signalman's shack some distance down the track. He hung the string bag in the power line, climbed into it so that it would not be grounded by the pole, and scraped away the insulation. The bare copper end of the wires he carried terminated in alligator clips, and now, holding one in each paw, he made ready to attach them. He turned to look at the dollhouse. The candles were lit, their soft lights shining through the blue, green, and amber glass, against which came and went the pacing shadows of the mouse and his child. The ex-forward scored wind-ups were singing some plaintive ballad the seal had taught them, and there was conversation and quiet laughter from the house as those inside it waited for the candles glow to pale before the glories of electricity. "Good luck and happy burning," said Manny. As he connected the wires, there was a blinding flash, and every hair on Manny Rat stood up and crackled with blue flame. He felt a shuddering thrill as the full voltage of the power line coursed through his body and sent branching lightning into his brain. The dollhouse blazed with light at all the windows, but the darkness swallowed Manny Rat where he lay slumped inside the string bag, his body swaying gently in the evening breeze. After a time, when he was missed, the bittern and the kingfisher came for him, and he was carried back to the parlour that he had intended to set afire. There they laid him carefully on the floor, and all the family sorrowfully stood over him. "Poor Uncle Manny," said the child as he paced around the room. "I will call him uncle. He made our self-winding, he made our house beautiful, and now he's dead because he gave us light." "He should have been content to stay in the dark," said the blind tin goat, and his squad mates laughed. "One can't help but feel sorry that his life was cut short like this," the father said. "He certainly was a changed rat at the end." "I won't say that I liked him," mourned the elephant, "but I can't forgive myself for this. It really is too bad." "I don't think he's dead," said the bittern. "He's opening his eyes." "Speak to us, Uncle Manny," said the child. "Say something." Lying limp and huddled like a worn-out rag doll on the floor, Manny Rat felt life returning to him. He half sat up and looked around him. The house he saw had not burned down, and found that it was glad. "Stay that again," he murmured faintly. "Say what?" said the mouse child. "What you called me," said Manny Rat. "Uncle Manny?" Manny Rat nodded and smiled, and opened to the smile, felt the darkness that dwelt in him open to the light. The dollhouse seemed at last complete. Every light shone in all its brilliance like a jewel hung in the darkness at the edge of the dump, and within it all were happy and contented. "There's perhaps just one more thing," said the elephant. The elephant said one day. "A small thing, really. I think our house should have a little sign." "What kind of sign?" said Manny Rat. "I'll make one right away." "I'm not sure," said the lady of the house. "Something dignified and simple. You know, the sort of thing. I mean, something that says the Gables or the Elms." "There's only one possible name for our house," said the child. "And only one favourable sign," said the father. The Bonzo label that had flown above the watchtower had long since blown itself to shreds in wind and rain, but a new one was found, and Manny Rat executed a faithful copy, painting the infinite black and white dogs on the traditional orange background on an oval board, and lettering the last visible dog quite handsomely. The effect was magical. The sign completed the place as dramatically as the eyes in a painted portrait might complete a face. The house seemed visible to grow taller, grander, and more expensive. "That's odd," said the elephant as he looked at the repeatedly receding dogs. "It's certainly a lovely sign, but now the house looks like an inn or a hotel." "A hotel," said the pacing mad father thoughtfully as he passed his wife in one of the regular circuits around the platform. "Why not?" he said the next time around. "It's the kind of place that birds would like," said the seal. "We would have travellers from everywhere to talk to." They could stop here every year," said the child, "flying north and flying south, and we could give them shelter in the night and in the storms." Manny Rat lettered a little signboard that was appended to the larger one. "Migrants, yes," it said, and the house seemed at last to have attained its full identity. The swine swung with emotion so august, and creaked with such a seasoned veteran creak. The house seemed always to have been that predestined place, at the edge of the dump, beside the railroad tracks, between the earth and the sky. "Here I am," it said, plainly as possible. "The last visible dog, ladies and gentlemen, at your service. Shelter and good cheer for the weary traveller. Enter and be welcome." Thus invited the migrants came. Day flyers settling course by the sun saw the gay colours of the hotel by the dump and stopped to rest at nightfall. Night travellers navigating by the stars saw the last Whipple Dog shining like a lighthouse and steered for its as darkness faded into dawn. Geese honked, passing overhead, and kept their landmark on their mental maps. Most of the migratory birds had already made their passage south, but late departing warblers and thrushes ended on the platform. Swallows, starlings, and orioles and tanagers, and soft-voiced mourning doves all praised the house and its hospitality, and promised to return on the northward trip. All the uncles were active as never before. Chairs and tables multiplied, red checkered tablecloths appeared, and potted plants. The place resounded to the cheerful racket of arrivals and departures. As fast as rooms were added, they were occupied, and twice that fall the platform had to be enlarged. Two next foraging musicians, splendidly renewed by Manny Rat, accompanied the feathered ones at evening musicals. Tin clowns and regulars entertained, tin animals did tricks, the blind goat carried trays of canapes, and the seal, when the lights were low, dimmed by Manny Rat's transformer, waggled among the table, singing tender ballads. Father and son, pacing tirelessly among the guests, exchanged stories of travel and adventure with them, and made everyone feel thoroughly at home. The Kingfisher designated himself chef, and the once reclusive Bittern became a wildly outgoing welcomer who kept a constant lookout from the tower and hailed all passing flyers. It was the Elephant, however, who more than anyone else got his stamp on the place. The immense dignity and noble carriage, charmingly relieved by the knockout look of a black eye patch and the pirate-style kerchief, lent the whole establishment a ravishingly patrician flavour that was irresistible. One bird told another by the winter time the operators of the hotels were visibly acclaimed as matchless hosts. Indeed, the Last Whipple Dog was said by birds in the know to be the first and only place to roost when travelling by dump. When the last migratory waves had passed, there were still frequent visitors. Chickadees, sparrows, nuthatches, and cardinals came to spend their idle hours around the tin can stove installed in the parlour by Manny Rat. The blue jay reporter, too, indefatigable in his never-ending search for news, both great and small, found the parlour stove and the tray of birdseed near it to be more or less the centre of his winter rounds, and there he spent much of his time shifting the local gossip and discussing the affairs of the day. And yet, as popular as it was, the house was not yet reached its final flowering in full fruition. That was to come later, as the fame of the Wind-Up family and the four uncles spread in ever-widening circles. The first imitation of what was to be occurred when the cause of art, visiting their old friends, turned the platform into a stage and got successfully through all three acts of The Last Whipple Dog at The Last Whipple Dog. Having achieved that, they immediately made plans for an annual drama festival that was to become one of the most eagerly anticipated events at the dump. It was to be followed in time by the Cause of Art workshop, personally directed by Crow and Mrs. Crow, which program was to be rivaled in attendance only by the yearly Deep Thought Symposium under the profound and powerful leadership of C. Serpentina. It was said by many that the strain put upon the erector set crane when it hoisted the voice of the swamp and pond of the platform was equalled only by the strain upon the local intellectuals when they hoisted some of his heavier thoughts, but all agreed that it was an experience not to be missed. The residents of the dump, when they had heard what was happening by the railroad tracks, were for a long time apathetic. Then curiosity got the better of them. Fearfully and unsure at first, but growing by degrees more confident, they crept out of their alleyways and came to The Last Whipple Dog to breathe the keen, embracing air of cultural revival and new thought. The Muskrat Foundation was set up, and the first course in practical physics was taught by Manny Rat himself. He, who was to win renown as a beloved teacher and mentor to the young, never aspired to the realms of pure thought, and many of his happiest hours were spent repairing broken wind-ups or simply tinkering around. Frog, with the advent of a committee of the surveillance of territories and the resolution of interfield enmities, or strife, as it came to be known, was elected its first chairman. He brought to that office his characteristic wisdom and foresight, and although constantly occupied with field trips, peace missions, and delegations of irate animals, he still found time, when his services were requested by customers either in doubt or in love, to tell fortunes and perform weddings. The Fashion Forum and Homemakers Clinic, under the joint guidance of the Elephant and the Seal, was an immediate success from its inception, and for several seasons, eye patches and kerchiefs were all the rage throughout the dump. The Muslim's child, who had learned so much and prevailed against such overwhelming odds, never... Oh my goodness. This keeps going, I'm loving this. Haha. Never could be persuaded to teach a success course. No wait, sorry, that didn't sound right. The Muslim child who had learned so much and prevailed against such overwhelming odds never could be persuaded to teach a success course. Popular demand was intense, but they steadfastly refused. The whole secret to the thing, they insisted, was simply, and at all costs, to move steadily ahead. and they said could not be taught. They were not idle, however, and were regularly involved to some extent in all projects going forward at The Last Visible Dog. All this expansion and amplification, however, was still in the future. For the present, the little family, having worked long and hard to make a success of the hotel, had reached that time of the year when they might relax a little and enjoy the fruits of their labours. Fall had long since gone. The hickory stood stark and bare, and brown leaves rattled on the oak. Snow hung in the roofs and chimneys of the dollhouse, and icicles hung from the eaves. The dog star looked as wintry road across the glittering night sky, and the sign swung creaking in the north wind's blast. The coloured windows threw their green and blue amber tints across the gleaming whiteness of the platform, and the tin can stove in the parlour gloated cosily as the year drew to a close. It was then that the family found the leisure in which to grasp for the first time the full dimensions of their happiness, and they felt themselves too small a group to contain it all. So it was that now, on Christmas Eve, while the bells of the town rang out their carols, and the night was bright with stars, the mouseless child paced on the platform with a heavily gloved frog, listening to the jovial hubbub of the gathering inside the house. Here they were joined by the elephant, and the three wind-ups, guarded by the guardrail, walked around the house in companionable silence with a slowly hopping uncle. They heard the seal's voice as she led the singing in the parlour, and the windows rattled as the company joined the chorus. The bittern and the kingfisher had gone out weeks before with invitations, and they had diligently searched out all the presents was essential in the night. Crow was there, and Miss Crow, both in fine voice. "It's hey, preux," the repertory parrot, was quoting from her favourite works, and was sipping a more or less moderate punch prepared by Manny Rat for this occasion. Several shrews, both from the meadow and the stream, had put aside their enmity for this evening, and were very dashing with their erect soldierly figures, their decorations and campaign ribbons. Jeb and Zeb, older muskrats now, were not so giddy as they used to be, were propounding the much new and little to Manny Rat. Propounding a new much and little to Manny Rat, and were amazed that anyone so old should be capable of mental leaps he made. The triumph of the evening was, of course, the massive presence of C. Serpentina. It was with considerable trepidation that the kingfisher and bittern had approached the voracious deep-thinker to invite him to the party. The bittern had broken the ice, literally with a rock, and the kingfisher then took a plunge and woke the celebrated voice of the swamp and the pond. Both birds had been suffering from cold ever since, but Serpentina was in excellent health and spirits. Reclining by a private buffet assigned especially to him, he ate steadily while sharing with a circle of admiring starlings his latest celebrations. It was on this very night, in fact, that the conception of annual Deep Thought Symposium arose within his powerful mind, and cast its shadow towards the future. "I hope our guests don't miss us for a little while," said the elephant to her husband and her son as they completed another circuit of the house. "This night is such a happy one for me that I simply cannot take it in all at once. I find myself wanting to look at it from the outside for a moment or two. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful and difficult to believe that we have one another and all this besides." Making sure we're still recording. We are. Hi. The father bumped against her gently as they walked, and the tin clanked softly. "I have felt that too," he said. "Do you remember," said the elephant, brushing the mouse child with his swinging trunk, "I was saying you a lullaby when you were afraid of the great world outside the toy shop window?" "I remember," said the child. "And yet," said the elephant, "it was also I who was afraid when I found myself alone in the world. And it was you and your papa that were brave and rescued me. I find that very pleasant to think about." The mouse child cried a little. He could not help it. He was so proud of himself and so pleased with his mamma. The front door opened, sending laughter and warm air out into the frosty night, and the seal came out to them. She waggled slowly around the house with her mother and her father and her brother, spinning a new ball that Crow had brought her. "The year's almost over," she said. "It was the best year I ever had. What will be coming ones like this, I wonder? What will the coming ones be like, I wonder?" "Better yet," said Frog authoritatively, and then together continued around the platform, enjoying one another's company in silence. "Good heavens!" exclaimed the father. He had been walking more and more slowly without noticing, and now he stopped, astonished, as a little reciprocally winding spring inside him, having lost a little energy each day, through friction, came at last unwound. "I'm not unwound anymore," he said. "Well," said Frog, "I don't suppose anyone is ever completely self-winding. That's what friends are for." He reached for the father's key, and began to wind him up again. "Not yet," said the father. "It's pleasant to rest a little while. The road has been a long one. We have been on low, the summer's darkness of the pond, high in the winter's night here in our house. Time brought a painful spring, a shattering fall, and a scattering regathered, as you foretold. And the enemy fled at the beginning and waited for us at the end," the child said, and he too came unwound, and stopped beside Uncle Frog. Oh, the child said as he too came unwound, and stopped beside Uncle Frog. "But he's not an enemy any more. He's my Uncle Manny, and we tell us our fortune again." "Your fortune has been made," said the frog, "and needs no more telling." They stood together, looking out into the night. The platform shook as a lonesome whistle was heard, and a white light slid along the tracks of the house. A rumbling freight went slowly clanking toward the town. One of the boxcar doors stood open, and the train rolled on. A bundle was flung out into the snow beside the railroad. The bundle was followed by a ragged man holding a little dog in his arms. Man and dog rolled over together and rose to their feet as the train grew smaller and was swallowed in the night. The tramp brushed himself off, picked up his bundle, and with a little black and white dog frisking at his heels, he crunched across the starless snow to the abandoned cottage. He walked up to the open door and stood there, his attention caught by the dollhouse that blazed like a beacon atop the pole. He looked across the yard at the last whistle dog in the town, as the town clock sent the strokes of midnight singing on the sharp still air. 12 o'clock it called, and Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Bonzo, said the tramp to his dog. Then he dragged a rotting wooden box over to the pole, stood on it so he could see over the platform, and found himself looking into the faces of the mouse and his child, the elephant, the seal, and the frog. Inside the house, the Blue Jay reporter broke off an interview with his starlings as he heard the clock strike 12. Excuse me, he said, as he stepped out onto the porch. Extra, he yelled, season's greetings, feelings of intense goodwill expressed by all. Then he squawked and drew back hastily as he saw a great staring face whiskered before him. The tramp saw father and son with the last and their family and the friends about them. He saw the last whistle dog and all the brightness of the night against the night. He heard the singing and the merriment inside, and he smiled and spoke to the mouse and his child for the second time. Be happy, said the tramp. All right, love. We have completed all 180 pages of The Mouse and His Child. Ha! I love you dearly. Sleep well, keep calm, find a llama, carry on. And we start a new book tomorrow. As we're winding down my stay in Iceland, and I'll be home soon. I think, well, we've talked about it before, so I think, if you recall, we'll be starting on that tomorrow, hopefully. I love you, Christy. Good night.